Hi, everybody. It's Thursday, and it's time for your weekly dose of Future Law Bootcamp. I'm your host, Joe Borstein, CEO of LexFusion and certified total freak about legal innovation. Today, I'm here with my friend John Scrudato, who is part of the steering committee of the New York Legal Tech Meetup, a developer for open source legal technology projects, has an engineering degree from Yale and a JD MBA from Michigan.
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Joe. It's so nice to be here. Appreciate it.
So as you know, on Future Law, as every week, the lawyers of tomorrow meet the change makers of today. We're going to discuss the tectonic forces bubbling under the surface of the $800 billion legal industry. Globalization today is allowing lawyers and other professionals from all over the globe to collaborate seamlessly on legal work, just as they do in every other industry. Technology is automating our routine processes while simultaneously crawling up the value chain every day. The status quo of legal regulation is being questioned and actively changed in the United States and across the globe, allowing professionals outside of the bar associations to work right alongside lawyers and solve legal problems at scale, and also enjoy some of the traditional profits of legal work. Finally, outside investment is pouring in. We're going to talk about that. These investors see an opportunity to make a broken system dramatically better. Futurist Peter Diamandis likes to say, if you want to make $1 billion, figure out how to help 1 billion people. That stuck with me. Law affects every single solitary person on the planet. There's a lot of people to help. There's a lot of money to be made in the process. So whatever drives you, idealism, greed, or even just excitement, I beg all lawyers to pay a little attention to the legal innovation space, and you might just find your purpose here. So again, we're here with John Scrudato, steering committee of the New York Legal Tech Meetup, developer for open source legal technology projects, and wielding an engineering degree from Yale and a JD MBA from Michigan. Let's start with an easy one. You're a trained engineer, businessman, and attorney. How do you see this current environment of explosion in technology and investment?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Well, I think you've kind of hit on some of the important themes. The disruption of technology, I think that's a big trend here. It's something that's really opened a lot of possibilities. And for someone like myself who kind of has that three-part background, what excites me is I do see all three finally starting to come together. Technology in particular, as I'm sure you know, has really started to drive down costs, actually, of some of the things that are potentially very disruptive in the industry. So, for example, data extraction, right? Being able to get structured data and actually useful business insights out of legal data, which is very complex, and it's written in human language. I think the ability to do that and to do it at scale, as you said, that was part of your introduction, and to do it at scale at costs that I think were previously unthinkable in time frames, likewise, that were unthinkable, where you can have software give you basic insights in a couple seconds. That starts to open up new possibilities and new business models. And I think, we've been seeing that, right? We've been seeing the rise of software companies like, Kira and Litera and others. I think we've been seeing, as you mentioned, more and more venture capital dollars coming in, seeing that opportunity. And likewise, you see existing players, law firms, and in-house legal departments starting to see the potential of technology and starting to think not only how do we leverage this in our current business model, but does it potentially open up new business models? And those questions are just starting to be answered. So it's exciting. It's really exciting.
Well, I'm going to pause you at two ideas you just threw in there, disruption and new business models. So just a little history on my background in legal innovation. I grew to be a leader in the Pangea 3 business at Thomson Reuters and then Ernst & Young. Now I'm working in mostly legal technology and AI. For the past 11 years that I left my law firm from very traditional practice, I've been told that I was going to be eating the big firm's lunch. It was going to be outsourcing. That was going to eat the big firm's lunch, outsourcing plus things like predictive coding. And now it's really evolved to AI. So last year, the law firms had a lot of lunch.
It's true.
So I agree with this concept of disruption, but it doesn't seem to be popping up in the numbers. It seems like both are succeeding. New law is succeeding, legal technology is unequivocally succeeding, and big law is succeeding beyond its wildest imagination. how do you reconcile that?
Totally. No, it's another good question. So the pie is growing too, right?
We can stop. That's all I wanted to hear. I agree completely. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, but it's true, right? I mean, there's so many different, the pie, so to speak, means so many different things. But, if you look at the regulatory environment, right, I think for a lot of good reasons, there's increased regulatory scrutiny of multiple industries. There's the fact that there's just more players. There's more customers for legal services, right? There's more multinationals. There's more mega companies that are competing for business both in the US and, abroad. So I think just generally speaking, that pie is growing and it's continuing to create new opportunities for everyone. Maybe though, and I think the data bears this out to some extent, the types of opportunities that different players are taking are changing a little bit. That I think is something that I've heard anecdotally is shifting a little bit, but there's still plenty of work for all the participants. And I don't think by any means they should be, certainly not today, they should be afraid that, they're not going to have a lunch tomorrow.
Right. I'd be 1,000 pounds if I actually ate that many lunches that I was told I was eating. We're talking about the massive number of point solutions out there, some of which are absolutely fantastic and game changing. How do you even attempt as a legal technologist to keep your eye on them and understand what's out there?
Sure. Well, for me, so taking a step back, you mentioned point solutions, right? I think there's sort of the way I like to think about solving problems using technology is kind of having a toolkit of different pieces that solve discrete portions of a workflow and create distinct value. So there's point solutions that are sort of, I like to think about them as sort of Lego blocks, right? And so you have some that are in document automation space. You have some that are in sort of dashboarding analytics. You have some that are more around workflow, right? So requesting forms, requesting data, making sure that people have access to what they need in a portal. All of those, I think, keeping my eye on different product categories and seeing kind of what's best in breed, but then also looking at things that are built in a way that are open. And when I say open, I don't necessarily mean, people might be familiar with the concept of open source. I don't necessarily mean that. I mean things that play nice with other building blocks. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big proponent of this. I think, the legal space, as we were just talking about, right? It's the pie is growing. It means legal is so many different things. Like if you've been at a firm, you know this, right? One practice group's workflow is so different from another's. And sure, there are some similarities, but they're not interchangeable necessarily. Mm-hmm. So if you want to solve a problem for one person in one group, you can't necessarily take the same solution and immediately deploy it in a different group.
Absolutely.
Right? So yeah, sorry, go for it.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, for me, I think having the ability to mix and match the pieces you need is critical. So for me, it's both looking at, does something play well with the rest of the ecosystem, and how well does it do what it sets out to do? I think both of those are critical.
And so I think of two sides to that, and obviously the theme here is interoperability, right? Like if you can use excellent point solutions as long as they play well with the ecosystem. So, one is obviously roll-up plays, companies that are buying up adjacent solutions and putting them together, and the other is APIs. Do you have a preference for one or the other? And could you walk the more lay lawyers through like what it means to have an open API, and are there good APIs and bad APIs?
So I'll start the last question first. There are definitely good APIs and bad APIs. So for anyone listening who's debating whether they should have an API and what it should look like,
should have a good one, I assume.
It should be a good one, but please document it, please. Nobody wants surprise features that either aren't documented or documented but don't work. So I won't mention names. But yeah, so in terms of that question between a platform or an API, there's a place for both, right? So number one, for those of you who aren't familiar with what an API is, it's basically a way for different platforms or different discrete pieces of software to talk to each other. So as just a real quick example, you might have, say, a form tool where when it gets a response from somebody, it uses an API to basically tell another platform, hey, I just got a form response. And that other platform, say, could be a document automation tool. And it could say, oh, great, I got the form response. Now I'm going to create, a new client engagement letter, puts it into a template, then it sends out an email. So that would be sort of a two API solution. You have the form, tells your document generator, tells your email client that you have a workflow that's been completed. I think that's great. It's higher maintenance than just buying something that's fully integrated. So I think the sweet spot is really, having a platform or product that does enough of what you want out of the box that you don't necessarily have to customize it, but where you need to or want to customize it for something that's either very bespoke, very high volume, whatever it is, you have that option and you're not locked into a single way of doing something.
And then there's another category of legal technology which is taken off is kind of low code, no code. We've seen for the first time actually really large funding rounds in that area. Do you see that? Do you see a world where law firm lawyers are using platforms like that to build their own customized tech?
Well, that gets into the age-old debate, pretty, very strong debate around should lawyers know how to code, or not necessarily know how to code, but should they be developers of some kind? I personally don't see there being a lot of need for lawyers to learn to code or even to do low code. What I do see, though, potentially is the evolution of what a law firm or what a legal organization looks like. And, just as you have at other companies, you have people who are developers, people who are product managers, and people who are, domain experts. And I think with that low code, no code value proposition, for me, what I really see there, which is exciting, is the ability to work with attorneys, with people who are more in a technical role, to iterate faster and develop things that are better tailored to what the attorney wants to do, without needing the expense of an entire development shop behind you, without needing those long development times. So basically, you can take what would have taken an entire company to build and reduce it down to just one person who knows how to use this low code, no code platform. And they can then work with attorneys to build something that delivers service or that helps that attorney practice law and work with their clients. Personally, I think that's probably the most likely path, but I'm sure there will be opportunities for particularly tech savvy lawyers to develop on their own as well. But I think typically I don't expect people are going to need to know how to do low code, no code.
Okay, so that's a great transition where you talked about having kind of one expert who could either code themselves or use these platforms that are pretty easy to use. One of the themes we hit in the beginning, we hit every time, is the regulatory regime, right? Like every lawyer knows that to incentivize the best, hardest working people in the world, you offer them a slice of the revenue. It's called partnership, right?
Sure.
And it is the way you keep unbelievably the best of the best in the minds day after day. Now, the way the U.S. regulatory structure is set up in almost every state, with a couple exceptions for some sandboxes, you cannot share basically, marginal profits with a non-barred attorney. That is not true in much of the rest of the world, if not almost all of the British common law countries. Sorry, that's my
No
mom.
problem. Can't ignore the mom, Joe. That's important.
You got it. Otherwise, she'll call over and over. But in the U.S., you cannot. Do you think that holds back innovation in the legal world to not be able to look at the end of the day? You can get lucky and bring on a world-class technologist who is happy to work for a salary, but most people who believe they're creating world-changing technologies want a slice of the pie. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely motivation for a lot of people who, like you said, kind of want to change the world, set out to create a world-changing technology. That said, I think there's a couple things at play here, right? One, some of these world-changing technologies are much more mature than they were 4 or 5 years ago, right? And that includes low code, no code, which you're just talking about. That includes, a lot of machine learning products. So not to say there aren't opportunities to create those products, but I think of the ones that exist, there's already enough value there that we're not necessarily talking about creating the world-changing technology. There's enough of that technology that there's plenty of work to be done implementing that technology. So, even if there are a lot of people who are motivated, like you said, primarily I want a slice of the action, there's plenty of people I think who are happy just to solve problems,
Hmm.
and there's plenty of problems to be solved. So I don't think there's a shortage of talent or incentive for folks at ALSPs or law firms or whatever, to essentially come in and help solve problems. And I mean, this is similar to Google, right? Like Google's a mature business. You might get a couple stock options if you go to Google today, but you're not going to make $10 million like you would have pre-IPO Google. And this is true at many tech companies, and yet they still have top flight technical talent going
I
there.
guess I would argue that you can still rise to the executive ranks, whereas it is almost impossible to
Sure.
rise any kind of profit sharing ranks. But no, but I think that's a good point. So let's move on because we have a lot I want to talk about. The last 6 months have been probably the most exciting 6 months in the history of legal technology. We had 5 companies hit unicorn status, which was originally meant for things that were rare. I think when you have 5 and 6 months, it's no longer that rare, but it's still unbelievably exciting. There's the old expression, money talks and bullshit walks. Like, until you can prove that there are viable ways for the investment community and those greedy technologists we just talked about. While they're not all greedy, there are some. Clio became a unicorn, Ironclad a unicorn, Relativity, iCertis, NetDocs just last week. When you hear that, what does that mean to you for the next 10 years?
I mean, that pie is growing faster than I ever imagined. But seriously, though, I mean, I think, I remember I had conversations with VCs 5 years ago around just generally like, are you interested in the legal tech space? I had a couple of ideas I was bouncing around. Just generally, the sense was like, it's not an interesting industry. There's too many barriers to entry. We don't see a market there. Literally, that's a quote from some people. And it's changed. It's changed, and it's changed for a bunch of different reasons. I think part of it, as we discussed earlier, some of the underlying enabling technology has become more mature. Also, the business has changed a little bit too. You see more and more clients are pushing for insight into legal efficiency. What are you doing around legal innovation? So I just think just generally you kind of have both of those forces affecting the industry. You have more interest from the people who are writing checks on the use of technology, and the technology itself is becoming increasingly more mature and more powerful. And it's we're going to see more unicorns, Joe, a lot more, I think.
No, it's an incredibly exciting time. So almost all of those companies I just named have AI built in some way, shape, or form. Um, what the hell is AI? Like what for the lay lawyers, like what is the difference between workflow technology and AI to you, and is there even an answer?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and there's a lot of layer. AI is sort of a term that sits on top of a lot of different things. I think the categories that are probably most relevant to lawyers are three things. So when people say AI, it in the legal space usually could mean one of three things. One is expert systems, and basically what that is essentially just a decision tree. So if such and such is the case, then Y, otherwise X. And oftentimes, what you're trying to do is essentially capture the knowledge of someone who's, say, run through a particular, regulatory regime a number of times, and say, well, if a certain company is doing a certain deal with someone in a certain country, then here are the 5 issues we need to run through. That's probably the simplest, oldest form of AI in the industry. Then you have machine learning. And machine learning can mean a lot of different things, but again, just kind of simplifying it, it's essentially a form of advanced pattern recognition. You basically show a computer model a bunch of examples of something, and that something could be an indemnification clause. It could be, what company names look like. You just show it hundreds or potentially thousands of examples, and as a result, this model learns to recognize patterns. And if you show it new things that it hasn't seen, it will give you an estimate of whether it thinks it's one of the things it's seen before. So, given random text, is this text a contract? And if it's a contract, is it an indemnification provision in the contract?
Yep.
And then the third branch, which I think is not as well known, is related to machine learning, is natural language processing, which is focused specifically on helping computers not necessarily understand, but at least be able to process human language. And as anyone who has programmed and written any kind of anything in human language, an email, an essay, they're very different, right? Like programs are highly structured. The syntax is really, really well defined. And with human language, it can be very, very messy. And so being able to take a contract, which can be written in an infinite number of ways, and reduce it into something that a computer can process with a predictable syntax is a challenging problem. But especially over the last 5 years, AI researchers, particularly at Google and Facebook, Stanford, and a couple other players, have built models that essentially, by reading enormous amounts of text, basically just processing it into a gigantic model, can kind of parse out some really impressive knowledge, even to the point where you can download a model online for free. And if you know a little bit of programming, you can query a contract. You can give it to the model and say, does this have an indemnification provision? Or that's probably too broad. You could say, what is the effective date of this contract? And with pretty good accuracy, it'll go March 18th, 1996. It sounds trivial, but to do that with that degree of accuracy and that little investment is incredible.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. So the new worry now, do the small legal tech companies have something to fear from the Googles and Facebooks of the world?
It's a fair question. I've been surprised how open they've been with their research. For as I could be wrong here, but Google and Facebook, I think, have published the vast majority of their research and their models online. You have other players like OpenAI, which has published a good amount of their work as well. And it seems like, if anything, they're actually trying to get as many people to use their technology as possible, because their business model also includes cloud hosting. Mm-hmm. So if they get new players to innovate on their core technology and then build their businesses on top of, say, Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure, or maybe less so with Facebook, but still, that's a win for them. That's a positive. So I actually think I think, if anything, they're helped by those mega companies.
An accelerant.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting. So so you personally are involved in AI training in the law through your work with the Atticus project, correct?
Well, I don't want to take any credit for the Atticus project. I'm well aware of the project. That is a great effort, though, and I think it's an example of how collaboration in the legal space can really accelerate what can be done with cutting edge technology.
So tell everybody about that, because that's something that I don't think our audience will have wrapped their head around.
Absolutely.
Myself included.
Well, so we just talked about machine learning, right? And how when you're training models, you need to have examples to train from. So one of the classic problems in legal is you need labeled data to train these models. And there's all these very powerful computer programs and models out there, but without the labeled contract data, you have to incur an incredible expense to go through these documents by hand and label them. So what the Atticus project has done is, working with law students and lawyers, they've taken a set of open source contracts, or contracts that are public domain, I should say, and they have come up with a standardized labeling scheme. So for the document types and the clause names, and they have labeled a couple hundred documents in great detail, and they've published this as an open project with an open data set, and anybody can download the data and they can use it both for academic or for commercial purposes. And if you go and look at their website, I don't remember it offhand, I think it's atticusproject.org, but just Google Atticus Project. Mm-hmm. You can not only download their data set, they have a published paper on using their data set to answer questions from contracts that it's never seen before. And I think it's really incredible, because you need this data, and nobody wants to incur the expense on their own to get it. And if we as an industry start to share that expense, our models get better and better and better, and it drives down the cost for everyone. And then we can focus on the exciting stuff of, what do we do with the data? What do we do with the questions that we answer? That's what I'm excited about.
Oh, that's awesome. So look, we've hit on all four themes: technology, globalization, regulation, investment. I think you've kind of answered this question already, but fear or greed? Should the next batch of lawyers be terrified? Which I spent 10 years trying to talk them off the ledge, or excited, or both?
I would, on balance, I'd be excited. There's definitely, around the edges, there's a couple of things to be terrified about, but I think generally what's exciting is, as we've just discussed, these technologies can do a lot of really great things, and the costs are going down and down and down and down. So I think looking out 5 years, it's not crazy to think you could have a world in which, if you want to practice law at scale, I love you said that before. I love that phrase, right? If you want to look at things across thousands or hundreds of thousands of examples, it's not crazy to think that you could, with relatively little cost and with just the resources available at a single firm, even a small firm, start to look at huge data sets of, what have we done in the past? What should we do in the future? What does the market look like? How have our contract evolved? And is that a good thing or a bad thing for client X, Y, or Z? I think those are interesting questions that just can't be answered today. And I think for lawyers who are excited about the law and excited about serving their clients, I think that should be exciting. All that said, though, if in industries where things are extremely formulaic and there's a lot of high volume repetition, I would be not fearful, but I would certainly be aware that those business models will probably favor increasing automation. So that's maybe
you want to prepare. Maybe it's understand where the progress is happening and how you can leverage it again to solve legal problems at scale versus being a victim of it, the displacement that will certainly happen. I think you said the right word in the very beginning. You used the word disruption. There's no question that there's going to be disruption, but if the pie is growing and you're paying attention, hopefully you can be part of the expansion of the industry rather than one of the disrupted.
Absolutely.
John, any final words? This was fantastic.
Well, just number one, thank you for having me. And number two, I'm so excited with all the possibilities that are out there. And I think the more people who are interested and the more we collaborate, the more we'll get done faster. So I think there's a lot of exciting things coming down the pike.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And hopefully you're going to get the New York Legal Tech meetup with over 1,000 members back going now that we're at the end of the pandemic.
That's the goal. Yeah, we're all very excited about that. So we got some stuff in the works. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, I will see you at the next event, and thank you so much. And I'll see everyone next week on Thursday for Future Law Bootcamp. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.